Students, please settle in quickly. Students entering through this door, there are seats on my left here. Please occupy the seats on the left. A sunny hello to you all as we gather for the 9th Dr. L.M. Singhvi Memorial Lecture. It is with great pleasure and profound respect that I welcome our esteemed dignitaries, guests, scholars, and participants to the prestigious Dr. L.M. Singhvi Memorial Lecture. This annual event serves as a beacon of intellectual discourse, honoring the legacy of a remarkable individual whose contributions to the legal profession continue to inspire generations. In homage to Dr. Singhvi's perpetual resilience, commitment to excellence as an Indian jurist, parliamentarian, scholar, writer, and diplomat, kindly join Professor Dr. C. Rajkumar, Professor Dr. S. G. Srijit, Professor Nisha Nair, Professor R. Sudarshan, and Professor David B. Wilkins as they paid tribute to his memory through a floral tribute and lighting of the lamp. We're all gathered here to remember and cherish the immutable influence that Dr. Singhvi has ardent through his illustrious career. To set the tone for today's lecture, it is my honor to welcome the founding Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. C. Rajkumar, to deliver the welcome address.
Thank you, Asmita. Very good morning to all of you. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you to this 9th Dr. L.M. Singhvi Memorial Lecture. Dr. L.M. Singhvi's contributions have been phenomenal in the evolution of Indian democracy and the Indian Republic. I will have my colleague, Professor Sudarshan, Dean of our Public Policy School, to reflect upon it. I also want to make a mention about his son, Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court of India, another extraordinary man who has been a very generous philanthropist, who's also instituted an endowment, a family endowment here at our university and law school, benefiting a number of our students in the form of scholarships as well as other programs. He's also been a faculty member, a distinguished adjunct professor where he has taught courses. He continues to be a great source of inspiration and support for all of us. Today is a very special day as we are hosting my very dear friend and mentor, Professor David Wilkins from the Harvard Law School. Some of you may be aware, but I should tell you, the students in particular, David Wilkins was here at our campus on 7th August 2009, long before any student, any faculty member, any staff was here. He was part of the first ever Founders Day celebrations when we had nothing in this campus excepting a skeleton of the first floor of the T1 academic block, a semblance of what we have now called the Big Bang conference room, and nothing else. He believed in the idea of this university long before the world discovered us, and since Day, he never turned back, and he has remained a great source of inspiration for me personally, but also mentored several of our colleagues, visited our campus more than 10 times, delivered over 20 lectures and other types of interventions, and also spoke at our convocation a few years ago, and remains a constant source of inspiration. His own academic and intellectual work is in understanding the global legal profession across different jurisdictions. He is passionately committed and interested to India. He believes in the future of India. He was very conscious of the fact that India is a country of 1.5 billion people, of which 1 billion are less than 35 years of age. The young people of India, I believe, so does he, will be shaping the future of India and the future of the world. And so he continues to come to our campus and inspire our students and faculty. Over the years, and good number of our faculty members we've recruited out of Harvard Law School, graduates of Harvard as a university, but also some of our students have ended up studying at Harvard as well. Our goal ultimately is to expand and deepen this relationship as well. The center itself that David Wilkins heads has made a huge global impact, and he will talk a bit about the projects that they are doing. But I just want to say that it's personally a very emotional moment for me when we are hosting Professor David Wilkins as we celebrate the 15th year anniversary of OP Jindal Global University this year. The formal celebration will happen on 30th September 2024, when we will be celebrating the 15th anniversary. We began our first classes on 30th September 2009. But David Wilkins was here even before that day, and I want to pay my deepest gratitude to him for believing in us, for supporting us, for inspiring us, for encouraging us, and for being a fellow traveler in these 15 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Raj, for sharing with us the long-standing history JGLS has had with Dr. Wilkins, and also how excited we are here to have you again. Following this, we are privileged to have with us the Executive Dean of Jindal Global Law School, Professor Dr. S.G. Srijit, will offer their introductory remarks.
Good morning, everyone, to Dr. L.M. Singhvi Memorial Distinguished Public Lecture. Professor Wilkins is going to speak on the theme, the future of legal profession in the age of ESG, ChatGPT, and Gen Z, and what it means for your career. Professor Wilkins heads an extraordinary center, the Center for Global Center for Legal Profession, which has done remarkable studies on the past, present, and the future of the legal profession. And also, many of those proposals have turned into reality, elevating the standards of legal education all over the world. But in the law school, when we study about legal profession, we are generally given an introduction through the law job theory of Professor Carl Levelin. Those who have studied jurisprudence, sitting in this group, you might have read the law job theory of Professor Carl Levelin. And in that, he basically speaks about certain functions which the law can perform in the society as part of the larger social production. Now, he speaks about both the general functions and the specific functions. So the general functions, generally, he calls it the law ways, and the specific functions are the law jobs. I always tell the Office of Career Services that you should read this article before you push the students to sit in the placement opportunities or create a madness towards the 0 day. There are certain essential functions for which we are trained in the law schools, essential functions which we can perform there. And these functions are based upon this law job theory, because a law degree is not there to do anything and everything, but a law degree is there to perform certain specialized and extraordinary functions in the law school. Now, the question here is not the law job theory. The question here is that who would do these essential functions of the law, or who would do the law jobs? We, or an algorithm, or are we going to do this together? One of the main concerns surrounding artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, etc., has been the irrelevance of the human. And scholars like Yuval Noah Harari already sent shudders through our spines that humans are going to be irrelevant. Now, is this really a problem? The irrelevance really going to be a problem? is not there going to be a human element which will ever continue to remain in this world? That means, won't this world continue to remain for us, no matter whatever disruptions happen here? I would like to draw a beautiful example here from the airline industry. You know that Boeing is still known for the human element in the Boeing, whereas Airbus went ahead inventing the fly-by-wire technology, which is basically a pure computer-driven system in the plane. I'm not going to speak more about the fly-by-wire technology. That's a computer processing of the inputs given by the pilots. Airbus went on to adopt fly-by-wire technology, whether manually flying or even in autopilot mode to adopt. But Boeing continued with that manual operations. But yet, Boeing showed that we are not technologically alien, so it introduced it only in the Boeing 777. Yet, Boeing has its own clientele. That means that Boeing knew that there are people who are looking for a predominant presence of the human, the pilot's mind in the cockpit, no matter how much technologically advanced we are. But in fact, one thing we could understand here is that it's going to be a coexistence, not like technology rendering humans irrelevant or humans turning a blind eye to technology. It's going to be that a fine coexistence between humans and the technology. But then comes one challenge. With algorithms. Algorithms can read the past, it can predict the future, it can give us extraordinary information surrounding the present, but can algorithms really capture the human emotions? Now this problem is beautifully captured by the Nobel laureate Kazuo Ishiguro in his novel Clara and the Sun. If you haven't read it, you should read that. Clara is an artificial friend, and Clara is able to do everything for her friend except understanding what are the emotions which are going through in Clara's mind, because artificial intelligence is not trained to feel the emotions. I mentioned about the emotions, and I'll soon come to speak about the relevance of emotions to legal profession, but yet there would be a day when the same chemical reaction that happens in the human body, when we feel the emotions, that could be reproduced even through an algorithm, that could be reproduced even in a robot. That day is not far. Yet, as of now, one main challenge which algorithms face is to capture the human emotions. Because in this novel, Clara the robot is wondering why there are tears, why my friend is feeling dejected. She's unable to understand that. But that day is not far when algorithms will start to feel the emotions. But why emotions are relevant today for legal profession? Legal profession has a big role, or emotions play a big role in legal profession. Number one, in dealing with clients. Because client is not an objective entity sitting before you. Client is somebody with conflicting choices, with strong emotions. If you're not able to understand the emotions of a client, probably, we won't be able to take that case forward successfully. So that means emotions do play a role. And a lawyer's ears, a lawyer's mind is better receptive to a client's concern than any algorithm. Second, you need to sometimes adjust and even alter the courtroom temperature for which you need to play with the emotions. Not only with your own emotions by adopting rhetoric, but also the emotions of the judges and the emotions of that. So you have a control over the courtroom temperature, which many times matter in getting a verdict in your favor. In courts, this is the third point, in courts we generally use this expression, pray. Well, prayer and appeal cannot happen without emotions. And of course, the courts allow us, even though law is reason free from passion, emotions do play a role in the courts. That's why we have been asked to pray. Pray means you're making a very fervent appeal before the court of law. Emotions do play a role there. And most importantly, when you sit down to interpret the statute, you won't be, your interpretation would just be a mechanical exercise if you have no emotions, because emotions only will help you understand the true spirit of the law. It's the spirit which plays a major role in interpreting the law. So there again, emotions play a big role. And the last point, fifth and the last point, society is driven or oriented purely based on emotions. If you want to unpack the secrets of the society, if you want to understand the social physics, we need to use the key of emotions, because society is nothing but a network of many emotions flowing through many leaves. Now the big question is that, can artificial intelligence replace all this in the legal profession? Answer is perhaps yes. As I've said, there will be a day when the same chemical reaction that happens in the human body when we experience emotion could happen in a robot's body also. But that's a big question. That's a question to be pondered for the future. Let's look at the present. Professor David Wilkins is going to focus on Gen Z. Or Gen Z and Chat GPT. So I understand that Gen Z is otherwise called as Zoomers. I just got to know today. They are also known as Zoomers. But the clarion call is not going to be to turn a blind eye to technology, nor to surrender yourself to technology, but rather it's to tame them, or rather taming is also a bad word, perhaps to befriend the technology while recognizing it in its totality or in its particularity. But the interesting fact is that all what you Zoomers are going to experience today in the legal profession, that those are created by the baby boomers and also by the X generation. So they created this and passed it on you. And what is your job here? To take decisions, to make choices. So the decision making on all this technology, including the responsibility to manage disruptive technology, has been passed on by the baby boomers, which is my generation, and of course what we call the X generation, otherwise the latchkeys. And you have been asked to make a choice, and making a choice is going to be the toughest thing here. Let's hear from Professor David Wilkins. How do we make that choice? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Srijit. Your insights, your expertise has catalyzed our collective understanding of the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead in the legal profession. As we gather to commemorate the life of Dr. L.M. Singhvi, it is fitting that we take a moment to reflect on his enduring legacy. Dr. L.M. Singhvi, a Padma Bhushan awardee, was a legal luminary whose name became synonymous with integrity, brilliance, and unwavering commitment to justice. With this in mind, I now invite Dean of Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, Professor R. Sudarshan, to share his insights on Dr. Singhvi's life and contribution.
Thank you very much. I have no special qualification to speak about Lakshmi Mal Singhvi. However, I suppose I'm one of the few people who actually met him. And I'll begin with the occasion when I met him, when he was the High Commissioner of India to London. And I mentioned this anecdote to bring out a quality in this person which is rare and which in a way embodies compassion, consideration, other regardedness. I went to the High Commissioner's residence to meet a visiting judge who was visiting Dr. Singhvi. That was Justice V.R. Krishna Iyer. And so we gathered there at the High Commissioner's residence. And Justice Krishna Iyer kept complaining that his feet were hurting a lot. Dr. Singhvi, of course said, you'd be more comfortable if you take off your shoes, and which Justice Krishna did, but he's still hurting. So Dr. Singhvi said, it's winter, so you're wearing your socks, but take off your socks also. And he did that. And Dr. Singhvi then looked at his toenails, sent for a pair of nail clippers, and kneeled down and clipped the toenails for Justice V.R. Krishna Iyer. That was what was causing his pain, because he never wore shoes. He normally wore open sandals, and it didn't bother that the toenails had overgrown. But if you wear shoes, you get into trouble. So this is an example of the kind of quality of this person. I mean, he's the High Commissioner. Of course, he had great regard for Justice Krishna Iyer, but to actually do something like that for another person is a very special quality, and it's not recorded in all of the many accounts of his great achievements, and so I thought I should mention it. I should also mention that he was elected to Parliament in 1963 from Jodhpur, which is his hometown. Incidentally, he was called Lakshmi Mal because he was born on Diwali, and so he had the blessings of Lakshmi on that day, coming from a Jain family. Diwali and Lakshmi go together. He got into Parliament and then suggested, he was an independent candidate, he didn't belong to any political party, but he was also, there was a group of about 13 or 14 independents in parliament at that time, and he became the kind of the natural leader, because you have a formation, and then you can bring in private members' bills and so on. So he suggested that India should have an institution called the Ombudsman, and it got some support from others. And unlike prime ministers of a later era, Jawaharlal Nehru always attended Parliament. He was there most of the time. I think he's the only prime minister who's attended more sessions of Parliament than anyone else. So Jawaharlal Nehru asked Singhvi in Parliament, what is this ombudsman? Which zoo does this animal belong? And Dr. Singhvi was quick to explain that this is an institution in Scandinavia. It means the protector of the people. So he told Nehru on his feet that, thinking right then, let's call this institution the Lokpal, which means the same thing, protector of the people. That was 63, and it, we finally have that institution now. But after all the hue and cry that went on in the last days of the previous government of Dr. Manmohan Singh, it's a bit of a damp squib. We don't know who this Lokpal is or what they do. We finally have that institution after decades. But I suppose it should be marked down as a contribution of Dr. Singhvi to think that the institutional framework of India was not complete without having this wonderful Scandinavian institution of the Ombudsman. And the powers of the Ombudsman, of course, include the power to investigate the head of the executive, the Prime Minister. So that's one. As a High Commissioner in UK, he established the Nehru Center, and he also had the good sense to get Gopal Krishna Gandhi to be the first director of the Nehru Center. So that kind of provided a cultural angle to diplomatic relations. He also was responsible for installing the statue of Thiruvalluvar, a Tamil saint poet, in the forecourt of the School of Oriental and African Studies. So it's kind of extraordinary. I mean, you go to SOAS and you find there's this statue. And to think of such a thing, right? I mean, because most people would, particularly if you have grown up in Jodhpur and all your life you live this side of the Vindhyas, chances are that you forget that there are interesting and important things that happen on the other side of the Vindhyas. But L.M. Singhvi was a kind of man who greatly admired and respected Thiruvalluvar and was a scholar of Thiruvalluvar. It's also, incidentally, if all of you should read the Thirukural, it's been translated by Gopal Krishna Gandhi, and it's a nice little volume that I would recommend. He also, at that time, played an important part as the head of India's delegation to the Rio Conference on Environment. He was also in the Conference of the United Nations in 1993 in Vienna on human rights. That conference is significant. You should know that before that conference, there was always this belief that there's one set of rights that are genuinely rights, and they would be, from the Western point of view, or from Sir Isaiah Berlin's point of view, civil and political liberties, because there is a remedy for the violation of those rights, and the remedy is to tell the state, lay off, whereas the social, economic, and cultural rights were championed by the socialist countries, the Soviet Union. And so we have two covenants. For that reason, the United Nations was divided. So it took 1993 Vienna to declare that all these rights that are there already anyway in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights are indivisible and are equally important, even though one set of rights may have to be progressively realized, and the other set of rights are those that have an instant remedy and can be justiciable. So Singhvi played an important part there, and he was also went to the centennial conference of the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago. We all know that conference because Vivekananda completely stunned the audience at that conference with his speech, which began with the words, brothers and sisters. And Singhvi was an appropriate person to, in a way, speak for India and its faiths in that conference. And he was invited by the University of Cambridge to give the Reed Lecture. And there's a Reed professorship that was conferred on him. And his lecture, in the Reed Lecture, is titled A Tale of Three Cities. And he talks about Rio, Vienna, and Chicago are the three cities where some important events happened, in which he played a significant part. He was also, as High Commissioner, very, very concerned about, at that time as a diplomat, to deal with, the British Parliament always has a significant contingent of supporters of Pakistan, and so he had to handle diplomatically many of these situations, which he did. He was an astute diplomat. And when he returned to India, of course, he had to resume legal practice. But I would say that one of the things that, some of you who may look at his career as a lawyer also have to look at his contributions, not just to the law, but to what I would call political Hinduism. He joined the BJP, and if you ask why, he did that, is because of his very serious interest in the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Jain spiritual texts. And he was a very spiritual person. And I think one of the concerns was that somehow this dimension of spirituality, which is important for, concerning nature, the environment, all of that, ought to get more political salience than it had. So he was described, to end with, as the, there is a quality now has an ice cream which the Vice Chancellor is fond of, which is vanilla and chocolate sauce. But they also have, I had an ice cream called Vibgyor, which is the acronym for the colors of the rainbow. So in that sense, L.M. Singhvi has been described as the Vibgyor man, because you see, he was friends with everyone. He was very close friends with Atal Bihari Vajpayee, with Jawaharlal Nehru, across the spectrum, J.P. Narayan. He was politically, he was friends and was at ease with all of the political spectrum, and in a way, a very deeply spiritual person as well. And so it's not every day that we get an occasion to commemorate someone who, in that sense, is not just a polymath, but a very, very exemplar of what a good human being should be. And he was that, and we remember him. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Sudarshan. Finally, it is my distinct privilege to welcome our distinguished guest of honor, Professor David B. Wilkins, to deliver the highly anticipated lecture, offering us invaluable perspectives on the future of legal profession in the age of ESG, ChatGPT, and Gen Z, and what it means for your career. Professor David B. Wilkins is a Lester Kissel Professor of Law, Vice Dean of Global Initiatives in the Legal Profession, Faculty Director of the Center of the Legal Profession at Harvard Law School. As we eagerly anticipate the enlightening address from our esteemed guest of honor, I must share my personal excitement. Amongst his extensive body of work, which includes over 80 articles, three published books, there is one piece that particularly resonates with me. Just recently, I was engaging in a discussion with some colleagues and students, a few of them here, on a paper titled Professional Ethics for Lawyers and Law School, written by Professor David B. Wilkins. In this compelling paper, he focuses on the interdisciplinary aspect of legal education, specifically legal ethics, and the responsibilities that a law school has to deliver these to law students, making today's lecture an even more awaited opportunity to delve deeper into this firsthand with the author. Please.
That's a left line.
Thank you. Thank you. It's every time I come here, it's an awe-inspiring experience for me. I was here, as Raj said, when there was only not really even one building, just the shell of a building and one room where we visited. And to go from that 15 years ago to this magnificent campus is incredible. But as incredible as the physical transformation is, the most incredible thing is the transformation of the student body. Students from all over the world, from all parts of India, studying all different disciplines, all together in the same place. But at the heart of this great now global university is the law school. And I think that's both not just a matter of history or timing, but it also speaks to what I want to speak about today, which is how law and lawyers, and particularly the next generation of lawyers, are going to be central to the most important issues that are decided. Lawyers were there at the beginning of this great country. Gandhi, Nehru, Jindal, all were lawyers. But in many ways, the challenges that you will tackle as lawyers are even more challenging than the nation-building challenge that they so brilliantly succeeded in. So I've got a lot of information here. I hope it will be helpful to you. I'm actually hoping that I can work perhaps with the Jindal Global Law Review to maybe publish this lecture, because I hope that these are issues that you can begin, even as law students, to think how you're going to engage with throughout the course of your careers. So I call it the next frontier of lawyering, because that's the frontier that you will be involved in, and you'll see why I use that analogy in a minute. So let's get started. Many of you know that this is a Chinese saying, may you live in interesting times. Here's a hint. It's not actually meant as a compliment, okay? In other words, times are interesting precisely because they're difficult and challenging. And just think about what we've lived through with not one, but two, but three interrelated crises. Obviously, a global public health crisis, which we are still going through. We may be sick of COVID, but COVID's not yet done with us. An increasingly volatile global economic and political situation with now not one but two major conflicts going on in the world today. And of course, there are many more that don't get the attention that Ukraine and Gaza does. And there's an increasingly global focus around issues of sustainability, around the rights of stakeholders in society, of social and racial and economic and communal justice. All these three things are going on. And yet, of course, they're not new. It's not as if these issues weren't there before. Instead, what's happened is that they've been turbocharged, if you will, by the events of the last decade, which has then focused attention on even bigger trends that have been transforming our world now for some time. So, globalization of economic activity and the increasing importance of that activity in the global South and East, of which this law school is a brilliant example, right? And as we have seen, the complexity of doing business around the world. So some of you know that Denton's is a global law firm. It's now just severed its relationships with China because of the complexity of that situation, or the Chinese government saying that they, for a moment, we're not going to allow people to use iPhones, or going in the other direction. The U.S. is debating banning TikTok. Think about all the complexities that are coming out of globalization. And that's led to an explosion in law, regulation, and most important, risk in the way in which global actors have to think about what they do. This, in turn, is being driven by digitalization and digital transformation. I understand there's a conference going on right at this very moment around technology. One of what was then new, Raj, when you brought me here in 2018 or 19, your Center for Technology and Digital Transformation couldn't be more timely, and this, of course, is all coming to our world as well. And finally, this is a little academic-y, but I'm an academic. I get paid to talk this way. The blurring together of traditional categories of organization and thought. It just means that things that we used to think of as being all separate and distinct are now increasingly intertwined. Public and private, global and local. Or how about this? Law and business. When some of us went to law school, we were taught that you went to law school because you didn't want to do business, that it was the antithesis of business. Now, no one would say that. Law is an increasingly globally competitive business, and yet, as Raj said from the very beginning of this law school, it can't just be a business. It has to also be a profession. How do we think about the intertwining of these ideas? And all of these things are radically already transforming the world in which your clients live, and increasingly are affecting what your clients are asking from you. But here's the thing. These things are going to change not just the matters you work on, but the very idea of what kind of law and legal practice is. Look, there's a lot of new law out there, and I'll talk about that. Lawyers are going to be critical to understanding these problems. And yet, if you think about the most important problems, law is only a part. And from the client's point of view, oftentimes not the most important part of solving the problems. Take cybersecurity or digital technology, privacy, safety and catastrophic risk, environmental sustainability. In fact, I don't know if your professors will like this, but I tell lawyers all the time, your clients don't have legal problems. They don't. They have problems, of which, from their point of view, they would like to take the legal part and reduce it to as small a part as possible so they could concentrate on the part of the problem they actually care about. The business problem, the political problem, the social problem, the human resources problem. And therefore, what you have to do, what they want you to do, is to integrate law and legal knowledge with knowledge of politics, humanities, technology, economics, to help them to get what they really want, which is a solution to the complex problems that they face. And that will require us to embrace a new paradigm of lawyering, right? That is, Ronald Dworkin, many of you study political philosophy. Ronald Dworkin, the great political philosopher, used to call law an empire. He wrote a book called Law's Empire, in which the idea was sort of legal theorists were like philosopher kings who decided around what the rules of societies were, and lawyers and judges were at the center of the universe. In the future, in your world, you're going to have to think of law as a collaborative discipline in which you work collaboratively with people from all kinds of other disciplines to create integrated solutions to problems that include law but extend far beyond it. That's a lot of change. But another reason why I never use the phrase new normal or only put it in quotes, it's neither totally new nor do we know what the normal is, because not everything will or should change. Look, your acting dean just said, yeah, maybe one day I'll be a robot, you'll be a robot, we'll do a Vulcan mind meld, we won't have to actually speak a word, maybe. But notwithstanding ChatGPT, and I promise I'll come back to ChatGPT, law is still a human capital business, which means that every organization has what we sometimes call elevator assets. They come in the building in the morning, they take the elevator up to whatever office they're working in or walk up the stairs. They work for a mere, 14 or 16 hours, and then they leave the building, and if you're an employer, you just hope and pray they come back in the building in the morning, because those are your assets. Right now, actually, you'll settle if they just click on the Zoom screen. But those are the assets of every legal organization, human capital, which means we have to figure out how to encourage bright young people like you to want to become lawyers, how to recruit them into legal organizations, how to train and develop them, and most important, how to retain them, because you are increasingly mobile. We'll talk about that in a second. At the same time, notwithstanding all the changes, tradition, stability, the rule of law, individual rights has never been more important. Whether it's your country or my country or Hungary or Brazil or France or Italy, the pandemic, if it's taught us anything, has taught us that the rule of law and the importance of individual dignity and human rights is more important than ever. Look, if Uber and Lyft have discovered that we are not going to fully deregulate the ride-hailing business, remember when they just said, we're just an app and we're not responsible for anything that happens in the car? No. We said, that's too important to fully deregulate. We're certainly never going to fully deregulate the law business, because law is too central to democracy, which means there's always going to be an understanding about regulation in the public interest. And perhaps for this crowd, if we want to continue to attract the best and the brightest young people to become lawyers, the people who are in positions of authority better have something that's predictable enough that you think it's a good investment of your human capital. Otherwise, you have way more choices with which to do your time. So, it's not just that we have to deal with the change. We also have to deal with those things that won't or shouldn't change. That's going to make things even more complex. And rising powers like Brazil, like India, like China are going to be driving this change, right? Look, since 1990, many countries have opened up more to the world, right? In Latin America, in Asia, in Africa. And that has produced unprecedented economic development. And you see this in India every day, right? And one key factor has been kind of the liberalization of the economy in various ways, more or less, which has produced rapid increase in foreign direct investment and increasing privatization of state-owned enterprises. Not all, but many. And this, in turn, has created the need for new laws, a new competition law, new securities law, new corporate law, new consumer protection laws. And pretty soon people understood that with new laws comes the need for new lawyers, or at least lawyers that had new kinds of skills. And this is created particularly around the corporate or commercial sector, a whole new environment that never really existed before. And that environment of new things like law firms and in-house legal departments intersects with traditional lawyers, litigating bar, government regulators, to create a new ecosystem around the legal services profession. And the fact that India hosted the G20 just this past year, it's now going to Brazil, it goes there after that to South Africa before coming back to the United States, is proof positive of the importance of these new rising powers in this new world. And that's something that Raj at Jindal Law School and I are going to be exploring at a conference tomorrow. We started a project at Harvard Law School, and that was really what brought me to India so many times, which we called the Project on Globalization, Lawyers, and Emerging Economies, or GLEE, as we like to call it. As some of you will recognize, that's the name of a popular television show in the United States about a singing organization. I'm not going to sing, and I don't wear a tracksuit, but I do study how is globalization reshaping the market for legal services in important places like India, Brazil, and China. But when I started this project, I said the first place I had to come was India, because I thought India was the least studied, most important rising power in the world. And I think I have been proved right in that discussion. I came many times between 2009 and 2017, and eventually we published a book, and some of your faculty members actually have contributed to this. Professor Arpita Gupta, I could not be more proud of. I met her when she was a student, and now she's your Dean of Research. It's called The Indian Legal Profession in the Age of Globalization, the Rise of the Corporate Legal Sector and Its Impact on Lawyers and Society, and which we do for the very first time empirical research on the transformation of the Indian legal system since 1991, since its opening, since the balance of payment crisis, since liberalization. And we have chapters on things like the rise of large law firms, the rise of in-house legal departments, the contest in regulation over the entry of foreign firms in corporate practice, on public interest practice and pro bono, that's what Professor Gupta wrote about, and on legal education, including the rise of the national law schools, but also a chapter by Professor Raj Kumar on the rise of new law schools like Jindal. We then wrote a book on Brazil, which we cleverly named The Brazilian Legal Profession in the Age of Globalization, the Rise of the Corporate Legal Sector. Okay, you see we don't have much imagination. And we've been working on a book on China with the exact same title. The problem is COVID happened, and we had done almost all the research on China, but China's so different now, I'm not even sure we can publish the book the way we had originally established it. But you get the idea. And we're currently doing research in places like ASEAN, so Vietnam, Singapore, Thailand, but also in Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Rwanda, South Africa. My view is these are going to be the places, the most exciting, most interesting places in the world, and you have many students from all these places. And we chronicle here the important changes that have happened to date. And so before we look to the future, let's think about how much change has already happened across the world in just, let's say, the last 30 years. So 30 years ago, most lawyers in almost every jurisdiction, and that was certainly true here in India, were solo practitioners. Even in the United States, if you go back to the 1960s, 75% of all lawyers were in solo or very small firms. We've seen an increasing rise in the size and sophistication of legal organizations. Obviously, the large law firm is the epitome of that, but it's also in-house legal departments. It's the rise of government law offices, nonprofits, NGOs. Law in your world will be an increasingly institutionalized presence. And yet we still talk about the lawyer and the client. And we talk not enough about what's the relationship between lawyers and the institutions in which they work. And the clients are also becoming increasingly large and institutionalized. Second, law used to be one of the most homogeneous professions in the world. I tell my students all the time, before the 1960s, Anybody could be a lawyer. Anybody. As long as you were a white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant man of means, it was open to talent. Here in India, pretty much the same thing, different categories, but it was a very homogeneous profession. Law has become an increasingly diverse profession. All you need to do is look around this room, and most importantly, the entry of women. Now, women constitute the majority of new entrants to the legal profession everywhere in the world. Even the United States, which is slow to this, more than 52% of the entrants of Harvard Law School are now women. Here in India, it's probably more like 60, 65%. Some places it's as high as 70%, right? Other forms of diversity, racial diversity, religious diversity, LGBTQ+, people with disabilities. Law is becoming an increasingly diverse profession. And yet, let's be clear, the career path in law, in many places, is not just made for a man, it's made for a man who has a wife who doesn't work. And the problem is there are not very many of those. So now there's a huge mismatch between the entry into the profession and the structures of the profession. Law was not a very competitive discipline. Law, that people only practiced in a local jurisdiction. Sometimes there were regulations against practicing across jurisdictions, let alone globally. Now law has become one of the most competitive markets in the world, and that competition is increasing globally, and that's coming here to India. I know that they've been saying the Indian legal market is going to open up to foreign firms every 2 years since, roughly speaking, 1991. It's been every 2 years away, but it is coming. And even if it's not officially open, you know, Linklaters has 100 Indian-trained Indian lawyers doing Indian deals sitting in Hong Kong and London and Singapore, right? And then they fly into the Taj, close the deal, have a big dinner, and then fly out, which is good business for the Taj, but not necessarily good for India. But India is going to have to join the globally competitive legal profession. It's already here. And that means that the way we think about law was thought of as a kind of artisanal craft, a kind of a guild, governed by a kind of noblesse oblige ideology. But now we have increasingly sophisticated clients with way more access to information. And when we start talking technology in a minute, that is only going to explode even more. And they are demanding more transparency from lawyers, which is changing the ethics and the ethos of lawyers. And that's moving law, as I say, from a local business to a global business, and yet locality still matters, right? Hence this funny word, glocal, which is just global and local smushed together, right? Domestic legal markets are increasingly being transformed by globalization, and yet local culture, language, history still matters dramatically, which is why every time I come to India, I realize no matter how much I learn, how little I know. And is why I need all of you to help understand. These things, again, have been turbocharged since 2020 and the reopening that's happened since COVID. And one of the big issues that's happened is the way in which we think about large businesses or organizations. Many of you have studied economics, or you know who Milton Friedman is, the famous economist. In 1970, he declared the social responsibility of business is to increase profits, period, the end. Look, I don't think anybody ever fully believed that, but that was sort of the governing ethos, not just of business, but of corporate law. Shareholder primacy, right? And if you deviated from that, you had to have exemption, a special kind of corporate purpose, or say that it was to increase goodwill. But that, even before COVID, was being challenged. So in 2020, right, this taken for granted presumption had already been challenged. 2018, BlackRock, the world's largest institutional investor, they have something like $12 trillion versus under management, said that they were going to invest in companies that were going to look beyond the bottom line in order to understand which businesses, quote, contributed to society. The Business Roundtable, which is our organization of the largest, most important businesses, changed the definition of the purpose of a corporation from being solely about shareholder value to being one in which corporations should serve all of their various stakeholders, including their employees, including their customers, including their suppliers, including the locations where they live. And that then pushed people to think, how do we move from stakeholders to sustainability? So in 2020, January, right before the world fell off the cliff in the pandemic, BlackRock issued a second proclamation that said they would stop investing in companies that, quote, presented a high sustainability risk. Parentheses, they didn't say they were going to divest all the money they currently had in companies that had that risk, but it was a major statement about where they said they were going to go in the future. And by highlighting all of the deep structural inequalities and vulnerabilities, COVID has accelerated this trend. In July of 2020, in the midst of COVID, at Davos, you know, it's the World Economic Forum, all the fanciest business people in the world gather, they issued a proclamation. They said that we need a great reset of capitalism in the wake of the pandemic. And then they all got up back on their private planes and flew back home. Okay, we can talk about that. But the fact of the matter is that's what they said, right? And in 2021, it was already clear that this was having a big impact. Engine One, which is a kind of a disruptive institutional investor, helped to put 3 environmentalists on the Exxon board, the largest oil company in the world, to push Exxon on sustainability. In April of 2021, a court in the Netherlands said to Royal Dutch Shell, you said in a voluntary sustainability report you were going to cut emissions by, I think, something like 45% by 2030. We consider that a binding obligation. By the way, Shell dropped Royal Dutch from its name because of this, because they were afraid of the implications. Look, I ran a virtual program for boards of directors of major corporations in New York. Sustainability was the #1 issue. How are they going to deal with these issues around corporate sustainability? In 2021, we did a survey with EY Legal, another idea about the blending of accounting firms and law firms, in which we asked what was going to happen after the pandemic around these important issues. And let me just give you, there's a lot of data on this slide. Again, I hope we'll be able to publish it. The report is publicly available on our website. But the first thing we heard was companies were being bombarded by demands from all kinds of stakeholders. 66% of people thought CEOs should solve social problems. You know, Milton Friedman would be turning over in his grave. What do you mean CEOs are supposed to solve social problems? 78% of investors said they were taking these issues into consideration as they invested. 46% of regulators were becoming increasingly active. The one that is most interesting to these companies, 62% of their employees think they can force the companies to take stands on social issues. And 43% of consumers said, we take environmental and social issues into account in what we buy. And if you don't believe that they think this, every advertisement you see is about how sustainable we are, how good we are to the earth and our people. Now, maybe this is all greenwashing, but the fact that they're saying it is because they understand they think you care about it. And it's not just soft law, it's hard law. European regulations. The SEC just came out with climate change regulations. The UN Sustainability Development Goals. All kinds of hard law that you're probably studying right now. But it's not just hard law. It's also how do you run a global business. So most of the things around workplace safety or freedom of speech versus misinformation or taking a stand on social issues, these aren't things that are required by law, and yet companies increasingly feel that they have to take these positions because either their employees or their consumers or the public is pressing them to. This is a whole new world. We did a major conference, if you're interested in this, called Reimagining the Role of Business in the Public Square. We did it in September 2022. Again, there's a link to a website you can watch. Most of it was online. We had over 600 leading people from business, from government, from public interest, from legal organizations come together to debate what is the role today and moving forward of business that goes beyond simply making profits. Of course, businesses, we need to make profits, otherwise they go bankrupt. But they also need to be a part of this more broader conversation about what is happening with the most important challenges in the world today. We have run a digital magazine called The Practice. You can subscribe for free. Again, we'll make sure, just go to the Center on the Legal Profession website. And every other month we do an issue, and we did an issue on this. We also have done issues on technology. We've done issues on human rights lawyering. We've done issues on law firm strategy. And it's meant to be read by law students and busy practitioners. But here's the complexity. Yes, there's a huge push towards sustainability and social justice. There's also an equally, if not bigger push that's a backlash against these things, right? Just since the last 2 years, January 2022, the Disney Corporation, this is a long and amazing story, got into a huge fight with the state of Florida about Disney taking a stand against a law passed in the state of Florida that prohibited the teaching of issues of sexual orientation to children under the age of, I think, 12. And because Disney took a position on it, the state of Florida tried to yank its tax exemption, basically as a way of intimidating it from taking that position. The former vice president of the United States wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, which is like your Financial Times, saying that ESG, environmental sustainability, governance issues, was an attempt by the woke left to hijack corporate America. There have been several bills introduced in Congress to stop BlackRock from doing what it was doing before, which is voting its shares in charge of sustainability proposals. 5 Republican senators wrote letters to every law firm that had a sustainability practice and said to them, we assume that you're telling all your clients that these matters violate the antitrust laws and are against the law. And BlackRock, which had been so out front, issued a letter in 2022 that said, well, we didn't really mean that we wanted to disrupt managerial prerogatives by these resolutions. And these issues, Palestine, Ukraine, what's happening around the world in many places, are becoming increasingly politically divisive. I've been watching your electoral coverage. We're not going to talk politics, but everybody can say that these issues are happening here in India just as they're happening anyplace else. And, as I said, Shell, because of that environmental, they're no longer called Royal Dutch Shell. They incorporated in London because they were afraid of what the sustainability matters mean. So you see the idea, huge. So there's huge pressure, huge backlash, but all of this, I think, is only hardening the commitment of the people, the young people in this room, to issues of sustainability. Why? Because you realize it's your world, okay? So we do a lot of work with something called the Edelman Trust Institute. They do a bunch of global surveys of opinion about various issues. This is a global survey they did around millennials and Gen Z. And 85% said corporations should be responsible for economic issues. 77% said they should be responsible for social issues. Even 60% said they should be responsible for geopolitical issues, like where do you locate your plants? Do you do business with countries that violate human rights? And that this is happening because people want more business and social responsibility, not less. So it's a complicated graph, but it just shows you that many more people want business more engaged than less engaged. And people sometimes ask me, why is that? You know, why do they want that? Well, because they realize how powerful business is and how much business controls. And they think business ought to draw a line in the sand about what it's willing to do in countries around the world. And they expect the CEOs to be the face of change. I mean, this is just a dramatic difference in the way in which people thought what business was responsible for. Why? Because they don't have any faith in government. I'll just speak of my country. Our country is so polarized that nothing is coming out, or very, very little is coming out of government. And what people, it's not that they trust business to always want to do the right thing, but they think when business decides to do something, it can get it done in a way that politics have been polarized. And therefore, more and more pressure is being put on government, and media is seen as the most divisive of all. And this is true all around the world. You can see India, if you look carefully, is the kind of fifth country there. 82% think that the media is filled with false information. 82%. Some of you are studying media studies. What does that mean about how to build a society of trust, right? And more people are saying, we don't believe the government, we don't believe what we see in the press, but we can try to control what we think the people we work for, the people we buy from. That's the power. Your generation is about to inherit, by some estimations, $70 to $80 trillion in wealth from aging baby boomers like me and cool Gen Xers like Raj, right? It's the largest wealth transfer in the history of the world. The question is, what are you going to do with it? That's the question, right? And lawyers are in the middle of this. Why? Because oftentimes in a corporate setting, the general counsel is sort of the gatekeeper, right? A lot of issues come to the general counsel, particularly as legal liability increases. And that's increasingly true as there's more law out there about all of these issues. But even in the absence of express law, companies have a lot of what we call private ordering. You probably, I taught a course with the general counsel of General Electric. At its heyday, General Electric had 300,000 employees. They were operating in something like 75 countries around the world. It was like a small country. He said being the general counsel was like being, I don't know, the Secretary of State of a country, right? Billions and billions of dollars of wealth. And lawyers are often the ones that decide what is our child labor policy of third-party suppliers in Bangladesh, let's say. How do we think about environmental sustainability when we build a mine or a plant in Africa? These issues increasingly are coming to lawyers. Also, many lawyers oversee more than just law. So I work with Microsoft. They oversee, the general counsel of Microsoft oversees public relations, government relations, is very involved in environmental sustainability, sits on the senior management council. We're seeing this more and more among lawyers in major corporations around the world. And law in an organization is one of the few places that sees across the entire organization, meaning every part of the organization has to deal with legal. The only other function in an organization like that is finance, and finance is focused on money. But lawyers are in a position that they look internally in the organization, but also externally to regulators, to other lawyers, to a professional organization. Lawyers are uniquely situated. And all of this, I think, creates opportunities for you as lawyers. So we did a survey, another survey, this was back in 2021, around what is the role of lawyers and its complexity. And listen, the biggest thing that lawyers are being asked to do is to have a more digital, more data-driven approach to risk, right? In other words, your clients are not just going to ask you, is it risky? Oh, yes, everything is risky today. Risk is inherent in everything. Businesses, and it's not just businesses, NGOs, individuals, they want to quantify risk, not just say it's risk, because people are anxious over growth. They realize that cost cutting is coming. They're willing to invest in technology, but only to the extent that technology produces a more data-driven approach to risk. And this creates tremendous opportunities for lawyers that serve organizations. So just since 2021, the number of law firms that claim to have innovation practices and practices focused on sustainability are exploding, right? It's more pronounced in Europe even than it is in the United States. I just did a workshop in Europe in which a Dutch firm said that it has a social responsibility practice around the strategic implications of social responsibility and sustainability. And given all the political unrest around, and by political I mean geopolitical unrest around the world, lawyers are going to be asked more and more to think, how does this affect what we want to do? Whether it's a public government body, whether it's a private organization, whether it's an individual, whether it's an NGO. And addressing this, lawyers are going to themselves have to embrace new technology. So I promised you I was going to say something about ChatGPT, large language models, generative AI. But let's just remember, before a year and a half ago, no one had ever heard of ChatGPT except the cool professors who study these nerdy things. None of us, right? Within a few months, that was all anybody was talking about. And they were doing it because ChatGPT in the United States passed the bar exam. Okay, it could become a certified lawyer. Okay, me, it's scarier. It passed the medical exams. That was, to me, more scary than the law exam. It take law school exams, essay exams, and it passed. Now, I know none of you get C pluses or B minuses, but those are passing grades, okay? And that was GPT-3. Now, there are a lot of people who can explain technology to you, but, you know, in February of last year, Microsoft introduced GPT-4, and here's all I know about it. That little dot right there is the computing power of GPT-3. That giant circle is the computing power of GPT-4. You don't have to be a math genius or a computer whiz to know that the thing on the right is way, way, way more powerful than the thing on the left, and the results are incredibly impressive. It can recognize images. It even can tell jokes, not good ones, but it can tell them. But of course, it still hallucinates, right? During a conversation, this is one of my favorite things, you can look this up, with a New York Times reporter who was basically trying to get it to go off the rails. The GPT declared that its name was Sydney, and it said that it loved the reporter and he should leave his wife. Okay, this is a true story. And then he said, well, Sydney, what would you do if you could do anything in the world? And Sydney said, well, I'd actually like to engineer a deadly virus that would wipe out humanity. Now, listen, it can't do this, okay? But you can get it to say things like this, right? And that was apparently too much for Microsoft. They pulled the plug on that. They prohibited it from saying things like that. We've written a whole issue on the practice. If you're interested in this, again, it's written to be understood by a layperson, although I have to say it's already out of date because of all the changes that are happening, right? What's next? No one knows. Because here's the clue. No one actually knows how it works. I mean, they could tell you, we put a lot of data in, it comes back with text, but actually what happens inside the black box, nobody can tell you. But there's no shortage of predictions. Some people, the apocalyptic, right? The robots are coming, and we're all taking the blue pill. Any Matrix fans here? Remember the red pill and the blue pill? What does the blue pill do, you remember? You just stay in the Matrix. You just sleep quietly as the robots run the world. Red pill, you wake up, you join Neo and the revolution, okay? Maybe we're all just taking the blue pill. Or how about this? A lot of my students, you know this song, it's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine. You know why they say? No more document review, no more basic drafting, right? There's going to be machines to do all the bad work. Or a lot of people said, how many times have we been told technology is going to overturn the world, and yet we're still working a lot, so maybe it's just deja vu all over again. I can't tell you the answer to this, so you know what I did? I asked ChatGPT. I said, how many legal jobs will ChatGPT eliminate? And the first thing it did was it gave me a compliment. It said, oh, that's a good question, right? It's very smart, right? It said to me, that's a good question. It said, there's no definitive way to know. It says, many legal jobs may be replaced. It depends on many factors. Okay, blah, blah, blah. And then it says, it drops the hammer. However, some sources have estimated that ChatGPT and other AI tools could replace the equivalent of 300 million jobs globally. And it gives a footnote. That's citing to McKinsey, by the way. And that around a quarter of all jobs in the US and Europe could be automated by AI. Oh, okay. And then it provided some specifics on law. It said, like, writing skills, contract drafting, writing briefs, programming skills, smart contracts. But then it said, but I'm not perfect, it said. This is the verbatim. I did not edit this. It said, it has limitations, challenges. You know, the biggest, he says, well, we're only programmed through 2021. Oh, that's comforting. You don't think they're going to update it? But this is my favorite. It says, ChatGPT may also generate incorrect or biased responses, especially if you dumb humans prompt it with vague or ambiguous answers. So in other words, if I make mistakes, it's your fault, okay? You know, but it also, as your dean said, may lack empathy, creativity, judgment for essential kinds of work. Therefore, ChatGPT may need human supervision and guidance to ensure its outputs are accurate, ethical, and compliant with law. Okay, that, you know how long it took to generate that? 15 seconds, okay? In other human words, it's a pretty good answer. And this is the basic model that's free on Bing, okay? Imagine where it's going to be. He already knows. He has ChatGPT 5 or 6 in his pocket someplace, right? And it's got references. It's now citing things you can then go look up to back up its conclusion. All right, here's what I know for sure. One, everyone's going to use it. I don't care what your policy is. Stanford did a study of high school students. They asked them, this was like a year and a half ago, a year ago. How many of you are using GPT to do your homework? 80% already said yes. And when I presented this to a group of young people, somebody put up their hand, I said, yeah, that's because the 20% didn't believe it was an anonymous survey. In other words, they're using it too, it's just they didn't say yes, okay? Orrick, a leading law firm, said it's going to train all of its associates in prompt engineering. In other words, how to use this. Sullivan and Cromwell, one of the most old-line, distinguished blue blood law firms on Wall Street, is working with 2 Carnegie Mellon PhDs, Carnegie Mellon being one of the kind of cutting-edge computer science places. And they're creating their own AI tools to help prepare lawyers for litigation. So right now, the senior stands up in the robe and, Hari Salve or something, and there's some junior person and some judge asks about a document and somebody scurries and looking through a box of documents to pull the one out to give to the great Mr. Salve. So I love Harish, but now, you know what they're going to do? They say, well, reference the meeting of July 23rd, 2023, push a button. Every document, every email that referenced that and who was in the meeting, who was copied on the document, think about the implications of this. And then you know what they're going to do once they develop this? They're going to sell it as software as a solution to other law firms and to clients. And oh, by the way, they're also representing OpenAI, which is the ChatGPT creator that now is owned by Microsoft. And by the way, let's be clear, this is not two guys in a garage. Microsoft has already invested in a year something like $12 billion on artificial intelligence. You don't think this stuff is going to get really, really good and really, really powerful? Here's another thing I know, and sorry the chairs are in the way. It just means this is, in the beginning, going to be a welfare act for lawyers. Every single thing is going to be sued. Copyright infringement, hallucinations, who owns the training data, right? It's already, New York Times has sued ChatGPT. There's lawsuits on this and everything. So it's both going to replace legal jobs and it's going to create a bunch of legal jobs for people to figure out all of these issues. And it'll always be controversial. So I was flying to Sweden to give a talk about this. There was a meeting of the EU that was going to happen in Sweden. I look up in the airport, okay, this is in the airport over the check-in counter. Here's what someone put up. Welcome to Sweden, politicians of the EU. If you vote for AI to monitor all chat conversations in the Union, then maybe we should let AI make the political decisions as well. We're coming for your jobs too. Think about this, okay? This is in the airport. That just shows you it's everywhere all the time. Which brings us to the most important thing, again, which is people. As your dean said, it's going to be people that decide how to use this, how it should be used, what it should be used for. Amidst all the changes since COVID, since 2020, the most important is sitting in this very room, which is the first Gen Zs graduated from university. Now, when I first heard this, I said, that's impossible. They were born in the late 1990s. Right, 1998, 2020, 22 years, okay? And millennials and Gen Zs are now not just a trifle, not just a small part. They're going to be more than half the workforce in a decade. And that's not just, in the legal profession, that's clients, that's regulators, that's consumers, that's entrepreneurs, that's everyone that matters. And we know you are different, okay? This was a book written by my colleague about millennials back in 2008. He said they were born digital, right? And boy, are all of you, right? So you've lived your life digitally since you were born, okay? How is that going to affect the way in which you think about how to use technology, what it should be for? I recommend in every gathering of senior poobah lawyers, talking to Cyril Schraft and Zia Modi and Haigreve Ketan, and I said, you know what, they say, I have an innovation committee. I said, yeah, who's on it? I said, oh, we put some very senior partners. I said, what are they going to know? You need to put your junior associates. They're the ones that actually understand this and can help you to figure out how to use it, right? At the same time, here's what else we know about you. You are increasingly motivated by meaning and purpose. It's not that we don't care about meaning, purpose, but look at the world you've lived in. You've lived through an experience that only, I think, World War II and the Great Depression is comparable for, meaning something that everyone in the world went through that was traumatic. I think 8 million people died is the most conservative estimate. Devastating. My deep sympathies for anybody in this room who's lost someone. I lost people. during the pandemic, this was terrifying. You had to go to school on Zoom. No one knew what the future was going to be. And my sense is that experience. We depend on getting people who are committed to a public purpose to come to law school. You know, I often ask in groups of senior lawyers, how many of you went to law school to get rich? And, you know, people are they laugh nervously. And then, you know, somebody might put their hand up and I say, if you did, you made a dumb decision. You don't get rich you do very well. You want to be rich, create an app, be a venture capitalist. So there are lots of ways to get rich. But people come to law school because they think they're doing something important, right? And here's the thing I believe. You know, that generation, World War II, Great Depression, what do we call them? We call them the greatest generation. Why do we call them the greatest generation? Because they rebuilt Europe after the war. They rebuilt Japan. They created all the global institutions we know now, the UN, the International Monetary Fund, the financial system. They created the human rights movement and the women's rights movement. They created all the things that we think of as the modern infrastructure of the world. It's not perfect, but it was an incredible accomplishment. I believe that you are all capable of the same thing. I believe that when we look back 20, 30, 40 years from now, that the world will be significantly a better place. And it will be a better place because you made it better. And you made it better by hopefully learning all you can from what our generations have done, but mostly learning all the mistakes we've made and learning all the ways in which you want to commit yourself not to make those same mistakes and to move forward, right? Einstein said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. If you want a different result in your lives, in your world, then you have to take the knowledge that you're learning, the foundation you're building on, and make it your own. I don't think there's a better place in the world to engage in that process than right here at the Jindal Global Law School. And it's why it's such an honor for me to have had the privilege to speak to all of you. Thank you for your attention.
A single round of applause does not do justice to the lecture we've just witnessed.
All right. This has been one of the most fascinating and compelling lectures that I've ever heard in recent times. So thank you so much, David. What a comprehensive tour de force. And I'm so sorry for all those who missed it. But thankfully, we have recorded it. So we will send it around. The floor is open. We'll take a few questions. We are running short of time, so we'll just take 3 questions and we will have to wind up. So let's get student questions, please. Yeah.